Hey friends, I'm Scott and it's Azure Friday. Do you know that Azure Storage customers have tens of thousands of storage accounts with over a billion blobs? And sometimes you can get overwhelmed with all the data management and data hygiene. Today, Santosh Chandwani is going to teach me how Azure Storage Actions can save the day. Today on Azure Friday. Hi friends, I'm Scott Hanselman and it's Azure Friday. Hi Santosh, how are you?
Very good, Scott. How have you been?
I am very well. I'm very well. I was actually in my Azure Storage account just working on some things. I've got over 1,000 episodes of one of my podcasts. This Azure Friday show has almost 1,000 episodes. I only have a couple of thousands blobs, but I understand that there are a lot of storage accounts that have billions, and I can only imagine what it feels like to be overwhelmed like that.
Yeah, Scott, data management is such a essential part of the hygiene that you need to manage for your data state. A lot of our customers, they have thousands of subscriptions with tens of thousands of storage accounts. It's pretty common these days for storage accounts to have billions. There are definitely many of our customers who have hundreds of billions of blobs within a single storage account. And trying to manage all of this data, especially as you're trying to look at these vast data states that continue to accumulate data. It's a nonstop process. It requires you to manage your cost. You make sure the data wants to be tiered appropriately for cost optimization or deleted in time. There are compliance requirements. In general, what happens is, like, those vary by geography, and depending on the content, sometimes there are the records that you need to maintain for years or decades even, and others that you need to delete in time within a few days. um, and then there is privacy, security considerations. You need to think about the workloads that are running. You want to tag your data appropriately and make sure that your workflows are going to take to operate as they're intended. And all of that can be compounded by things that are happening in the background with service incidents, where you're protecting your data, but at the same time, if there's an outage, you need to restore it back from archive or from a backup. So I think there's a ongoing task that our a lot of our administrators continue to focus on every day. And this requires like a full-time army of people sometimes to keep a handle on, with all of the infrastructure and provisioning that they need to do. So with Azure Storage Actions, what we're trying to do is make this whole problem a lot simpler, so customers can automate their data managed tasks within minutes.
All right, let me see what that might look like because I remember just being in the Azure portal a couple of days ago. Let's take a look at your portal. And what are we looking at here? Support calls.
Yeah. So let's see. If I think about, let's take an example here. Let's say if I have a bunch of support calls, as a financial customer, right now. I'm basically, you always hear that thing, then your call may be recorded and stuff, yeah, quality purposes. Now, what happens is, like, if I'm a brokerage, for example, and I'm taking trades over the phone, sometimes I'm, doing address updates and doing other, mechanics of, like, maintenance of customer support. Um, the problem is that, as you're collecting these recordings, you want to analyze them thereafter, but there are also compliance requirements you need to think about. So, for example, if a trade was placed during a call,
Hmm.
it gets tagged differently, right? Which says that, hey, this is a financial transaction, so now suddenly it needs to be maintained for decades. On the other hand, if you just did an address update, or you're looking at the account balance, there's PII information in there. You need to actually get rid of it within a few days, right? So there are, like, even as you, like, if you think about this, like, simple case, like, not every blob that is actually capturing the recording is the same. Now, how do I actually go about take a look at my container here, where I may, I'm continuously, my support team is taking the calls, data's keep coming in, I need to keep retiring it, I need to keep tagging it. And so, if you look at a job like this, you probably, as a data engineer, or as a administrator, I need to, I'll need to write scripts, I'll need to think about, like, what is my workflow here. I'll need to make sure that, if this is happening in multiple regions, then I need to, for each of the storage accounts corresponding to where I'm collecting that data, all of that needs to stay consistent. And then all of this needs to happen day after day. So, as you can imagine, like it requires infrastructure and code and things that you need to manage in order to make this work. Right. So, for example, in this case, let's take a look at a call. Right. So here, if I am the call gets tagged, right? So it says the call classification, like that an order was placed. And in other places where like it might say something like a PII data got updated, right? Now, what I want to do is be able to manage the compliance with this. So let's take a look at how you might do this with Azure Storage Actions instead of having to develop your own application to make this work. So what I can do is I can go into my marketplace and I can start composing a storage task. With storage actions, what I get to do is so let's say if I call this my compliance task, and I can actually just use, without writing any code, with just a few clicks, I can start to compose my condition, right? So as a condition action framework, what I can do is I can express the how I want my blobs process. So for example, I want to look at name, right? And let's say I want to process MP3 um, recordings, right? And I can add more stuff in here, which is I can say if the tag value and the classification is in order, right?
Now, this is the kind of thing that I think I would have written an Azure function for, and it would have been very challenging and a little bit frustrating to write.
Yeah, I think you definitely, want to go there as a function, or right, thinking of like, where I'm actually, setting this up. But you're gonna end up with other challenges as well, where you can understand that when you have millions or even billions of blobs,
Hmm,
then what ends up happening is even the simple listing of blobs itself becomes overwhelming.
that's
So,
true.
because you need to, like, as you call a list blobs API, it's a RESTful call, right? You're going to get like 5,000 blobs back at a time, and your response is paginated. Halfway through, if something happens, like if you running this day in day out, you're going to deploy this into a VM or you're going to deploy this into a container. If the container recycles halfway through, you have to restart. Like now you have to think of resiliency. Now you have to think of distribution. If I want to complete this task in a timely manner, I have to scale it out. So now I have to think of partitioning. If there are different geographies where I'm actually, having the same data for each locale, then I need to make sure that I have that deployment in every region because the data cannot exit the region, right?
Yeah.
So you can very soon this whole simple task can explode on you, right? And that's what we are looking at, how to solve this problem in a
Well,
much
it seems
more
very elegant.
industry.
This is an analogy, but it feels like when someone discovers triggers in SQL Server, and they're just like, "Oh, that's a much cleaner, crisper way of doing the thing I wanted to do." This makes sense that it's built in like this.
Exactly. And we are kind of inspired by a long history of the innovations that Microsoft and all of the other technology companies are built on and other platforms, and we're trying to bring some of those into your unstructured data work, right? Which is typically like suffered because the data is not as structured, so people tend to worry about like how do you do it, but even unstructured data requires some structuring and the way to think about, and that's what we're trying to help customers with.
Okay, this editor, this visual editor, seems quite sophisticated. It seems like it would take quite a bit for me to outgrow this. It looks like I can do quite a lot.
Absolutely. And, that's really the intent here, where I can, for example, I can add more clauses, I can group them together.
Hmm.
Like you can pretty much like imagine a predicate that you want to express, and it's possible to do it with this, right? You can, use negation, you can
Hmm.
combine this with, different logical
And
expressions.
these will fire. They're all idempotent and they're all atomic. They're going to go and do the thing that they need to do. I don't need to worry about debouncing or keeping track of whether it's been done or not. You do all that for me.
Absolutely. We want to make this completely reliable so that if halfway through we need to pause, continue, we'll take care of it. We'll make sure that, it carries on from where it left off. We ensure that this is totally idempotent so that, as you look at each blob, it's evaluated the exact same way. And if you run this every single day, you can actually start to do, and I can show you some of the parameterization that we have built in, where you can process each blob individually. So for example, let's say if I group these two, and I want to do something else here, like for mp3s I want to treat them in one way, but for all of the other files that I had in my so let's say I only want to keep the newer ones around. So let's look at something really interesting that you can do over here, right? So so this is what we call parameterization, where you can take the properties of a blob and make them as parameters within functions and within conditions themselves. So so let's say if I could give a creation time and say it's older than a certain date, but then like what happens if I want to run it tomorrow, right? So then I can actually do a relative, right? So say if it runs today, I can just say, relative to runtime. So I can say 30 days ago from runtime. And so if I schedule this to run every day, a year from now, it's not going to look at, like let's say if today was, October 1st, then, it's going to look at the data from September 1st of 2026 versus if it's running today, if today were October 1st, it's going to look at September 1st 2025, right? So I can actually express it in this way. But more than that, there are a lot of our customers that that you can actually come and tag your data and say uh, this particular blob I want to keep for 30 days, right? And I can just say, instead of using a fixed value, I can say use this blob tag, and like let's say a duration tag that I want to add, right? And I say, don't worry about what the duration is. I'm not going to tell you. I have a tag on the blob. Look at the tag on the blob. It's expressed in ISO 8601 format in date time. You pick that up as a value, evaluate it, and process it that way, right? And this is actually what really makes this whole system powerful, where it gives you all kinds of flexibility, where even though you may have billions of blobs within a storage account, with data sets can get really complex, where they're a mix of different data within it, like, so you can treat each blob differently depending on its properties and make sure that it gets processed in its own individual way.
Yeah, and having open-ended name value pairs, being able to put unlimited metadata on these can then be consumed by other things. So if I can't do a storage task and I already have, for example, existing Azure functions or existing triggers that are running on this, the interplay between storage tasks that then label things that then can be consumed by Azure functions, I think that's going to allow people that are learning about this new feature to refactor via subtraction. You may be doing compliance tasks on your storage now, and you might say, oh, we can even just get rid of that. We'll use storage tasks. We can delete that function or that batch job or that custom application, because storage tasks is not only going to do it, but it's going to do it better and easier and more reliably.
Absolutely, and I think you nailed it. So I think look at it, no, today, like, no single application serves all purposes, right? You want to make sure that sometimes you're using Spark, you're using Databricks, you're using Azure Functions, you're using Logic Apps, whatever works for you. For your scenario, right? You could be using AKS or other apps that you've deployed. All of that, you want to make sure that if I come in one application and set, like let's say if I'm processing, if I have an analytic job, as I process the data, I get to a certain stage and say my analytics is complete, I tag the blob, move it on. And then you can actually have that be picked up in a different workflow. And here, once that tagging is complete, you can come in and like look at the tag on the blob and say, oh yes, this told me that this workflow is completed. I'm going to finish this task. I'm going to, tier the blob, and I'm going to add another tag to say it's ready for the next step in my
Yep, exactly.
in its life cycle. And so then, like, another workload comes in, picks it up, looks at the tag, continues on, and makes sure that the data gets processed correctly.
So, in the interest of time, what else do we have in our other tabs here? Because I don't want to.
Yeah, so I can actually, set an immutability policy here. So let me show you, like, I had a task that I've already completed here, and I can, as I go create this flow here, I've actually done some processing on my blobs,
Mhm.
and set an immutability policy. I can also do a if then and else, right? So I can say, um, hey, for all of the blobs that I want to retain, because they for compliance, I retain for a certain date or a certain time, and the others I want to expire after a certain while, right? Once those things are done, I can now assign this to as many storage accounts as I like. I can do this on a single storage account. I can run this once, or I can set it up to run every day on hundreds of storage accounts. And
Mm.
the way that we do that is, by assigning a task to run. So I expressed my logic, and now, oh, by the way, I do want to call out one other thing that was pretty critical. As you express this condition, you want to be able to validate it and make sure that it works,
Yeah.
exactly as you intended. Because as you can imagine, like, some of these predicates can get complex, right? And you can do that as well, right in line in this experience, where I can come in and do a preview condition, and I can take my actual production data and safely test it against that, right? And it will show me what it's going to do without actually
All right.
manipulating your data,
It's
and I
like the
can see it
PowerShell what if.
exactly, right? So it
Very
actually
nice.
tells me, oh, which condition is met and why. Like, it's showing me the value, what was a tag, why that condition was met, right? So I can actually validate and make sure that it's going to do the right thing, right? So there's a whole experience built in to make sure that you can do this safely. And then, like I was saying, you can actually go and assign this on as many, hundreds of storage accounts. And then once I have done that, in my Visual Builder, I can, once this starts running, I can actually go see what's going on. And this, because what you get as a result is, like, let's say, in the last, like, I've run this like a few
Oh,
times.
wow. Yeah.
So it automatically generates all of the metrics. It gives you a summary of that with the tiles and the charts. And the great thing about this is I can actually drill down right into what catches my interest, or if there are any outliers in my flow, right? So I can see that there were two runs, and I simulated errors in one of the runs, right? So I can actually go and say, oh, I want to zoom in there, and I can click on that and go look at that. So let's take a look. So as these executions are completed, actually, I just triggered one run just before it started. So even though the tile was showing two, the metrics have not completed.
Mhm.
So there was a third one that just completed. I think you can see a few
Yep.
seconds ago. But I can actually go and see the report on this, right? So I can see that I got a summary of how many blobs have been stuff. But if I show you my report, sorry, what you get is a detailed report that I can now drill in and see exactly what happened to each blob. So if I want to come back and see, oh, there were a bunch of errors, and I want to understand why, certain blobs failed to process the way that I wanted them to, all of those are going to be captured in that report, right? So here, I think I ended up opening
Yeah,
one
it's
that
an
had
audit
all of the
log, it's a
successes.
trace log, it's a debug
Exactly.
log. Yeah.
Yeah. Because these are happening day in, day out. So let's say I'm not going to be able to sit there and watch them every single day. So whenever I come in and take a look, I can go back and see what has happened over the course of the past days or weeks or months, and drill in and make sure that it's consistent to what I expected. Right?
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. So
This
that's
is so good. This is almost one of those things you must feel like it should have always been, you know?
Absolutely. And I think that's what we are hearing from our customers as well, which is that it's saved the day for so many of our customers, from all types of situations where, there are cases where, people can now do a lot more in terms of cost optimization, data protection, or, you'll be surprised, like, the customers that are most thankful for us, and especially where you've had an incident where you had to bring in data from archive. Now, if like I lost my data for whatever reason, right? And if I want to restore that data within minutes, typically people have to go write scripts, and those things, you have to scale it out, deploy infrastructure. Here, we've had so many times where customers come in, and within minutes they can actually bring back or hours, they can actually restore like hundreds of millions or billions of blobs. And they've actually been able to get up and running. It reduces any disruption to your stuff. And there are a number of different advantages as well, where like especially when you think about these executions that are happening in your um, like if you were to write this as an application, right? And if this was if you had other audit workloads, other business critical workloads that are running, and you have these day to day data management tasks that are running in the background. Now all of these are competing for resources on the same storage account, right? So if you have a certain like transaction limit, that's the same transaction limits that are being consumed, right? The great thing about one of the other major advantages of Azure Storage Actions is that it monitors the load on the storage account itself, right? So it yields to more business critical workloads, right? So it says, oh, I'm going to use a spare capacity. If I'm seeing that you're running hot on your storage account, it's going to you know it modulate its own load so
Right,
that
right. It's
so
intelligent
that
load balancing. That's not something that I would be able to do as a consumer because my app calling that API and then my sidecar compliance task that's doing that. I, as a consumer of the API, am not going to be able to tell it to balance, but you have the inside track and you'll be able to do that.
Exactly, because we have the service, visibility and telemetry from the service infrastructure, and we can wire that back in, and do exactly as you described. So these are things that we can do by building it into the infrastructure and into the platform.
So this is out now, or this is in preview. Can I hang up the call and immediately go and apply this to my own storage accounts?
Absolutely. So this is currently generally available and you can use it in production. It's available in almost every region. We have a blog that actually talks about all of the capabilities
Hmm.
and how to get started. And more than anything, I think we have the really comprehensive documentation where you can jump in. There are quick starts, you can learn more about it. You can also look at the details in terms of how each of the different conditions and operations work. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think I'm going to be able to apply this to Azure Friday itself, as well as my own personal podcast, which is all running, of course, in Azure Storage. Thank you so much, Santosh, for spending time with us today.
Hey, it was my pleasure, Scott, and thank you for having me. And do try this out, and we're eager to hear your feedback. So reach out to us. It's storageactions at Microsoft.com.
All right. I'm learning all about Azure Storage Actions today on Azure Friday.